Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Anderson. You're joining us here at D2C Leadership Now. We're going to do an online briefing today with Dan Coll. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. If you have been on our sessions before, you know that these are recorded. You can get back to them at a later date if you want. If you did miss last month's session with Darren Lynch, I highly encourage you to go back and watch it. It was a great conversation talking about e-commerce sites and how brands can leverage those. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started here. If you have any questions as we're going through our conversation here today, I encourage you to use, you could use really either the chat or the Q&A section in Zoom, and I will do my best. I'm running one man down here today. Somebody who usually helps is traveling, but I'll do my best here to watch the questions, and as they come up, we'll fit them in, or we'll leave some time at the end for them. So please get them in. Next month, actually, let's see. I believe you can see my screen. Yeah. So next month, we're going to be joined by Dana Smith. Dana is the Vice President of IT at Lasco Fans. This is a company that, frankly, before we started working with them, I wasn't actually terribly familiar with their brand. And then once I became familiar with the brand, I realized that, well, A, I had them in my house, and B, everywhere I went, I was seeing Lasco Fans, whether it was Costco or Home Depot or whatever. So they've got a really impressive footprint in terms of their distribution, and have been doing some really cool things in D2C. And we're going to talk about scaling e-commerce growth and profit beyond siloed systems, and kind of how to deal with some of that siloed systems related problems that come up on a regular basis. So with that said, this month we are joined by Dan Coll. Dan, I'm going to invite you to join via video. Thanks for joining us here today. Dan is a guy who's been in the fulfillment industry for, well, I won't date you, Dan, but for quite a while. Maybe we can kick things off by just making an introduction here, and maybe share a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And thank you for having me on today. Really excited for our chat. I've been in the e-com fulfillment space for a little over 20 years. So started back around 2003. And as I like to say, my first e-commerce fulfillment 3PL that I started was in the basement of a bridal shop. So learned being a practitioner, learned the hard way, and eventually, found a love for the space, and have spent my whole career here. So had a 3PL for 10 years. That company was sold in 2013. Went and joined another Pittsburgh-based, I'm a Pittsburgh guy, joined a Pittsburgh-based 3PL called Genco, which was, after I joined 6 months later, was acquired by FedEx, rebranded FedEx Supply Chain, leading their e-commerce fulfillment commercial efforts. Was part of the launch of FedEx Fulfillment to the market back in 2017. And also worked for Kenco 3PL, helping them launch a new e-commerce fulfillment initiative, and now one of the partners at Fulfillment IQ. So yeah, a little over 20 years. Never 2 days the same, and wouldn't change any of it.
That's cool. So I'm kind of curious. You said you fell in love with the space. What is it about this particular space that you enjoy so much?
At first, for me, it was about being able. It was the relationships that you build, right? And I think when you are a practitioner in the space, when you are in the trenches, receiving pallets, picking orders, processing returns, everything that goes along in the warehouse, those relationships just become so strong. It's like this band of brothers and band of sisters that forms, and that's what really kind of attracted me to the space, and why I think I stayed in it for so long. And I think most of us in supply chain are pragmatic people, right? So I do like the following the data, doing analysis. It's pretty black and white, what needs to be done on a daily basis. So Yeah, I would say that's really, and the fact that things change, there's never a dull moment. No 2 days are ever the same. And, I would say that's where the love came from.
That's cool. And, I've been, as I've been sort of rubbing shoulders with folks like yourself over the last few years, and learning more and more about the fulfillment side of the business. You talked about the relationships. This is one of those communities I've found where it's kind of it's a small world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there are, it's fascinating. There's relationships go very deep in this particular industry. So today you agreed to come in and sort of help us understand a little bit more about kind of how to deal with supply chain disruptions. And I wonder if maybe we can just start by talking about what we've seen over the last couple of years. Clearly, unprecedented is the word that has become cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, because it was truly unprecedented, right? What we had to go through with COVID, and overall just how the pandemic affected supply chain. But can you kind of break that down for us a little bit and help us kind of understand pre-COVID, what were some of the trends that you were seeing? And then once that hit, what started happening in the market and how has that changed? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, great question. And I mean, maybe to just think of everything that's happened since 2020. I mean, we've had the pandemic, we had port congestion, raw material shortages, including the semiconductors. Now we're in some economic headwinds. We have labor shortages. We have increased labor costs. So there's a lot to unpack. It's hard to remember what it was like in pre 2020, 2019 and before then. But I think what we saw obviously in those early days was a continuous adoption of e-commerce and online businesses, right? We saw Amazon and Walmart and other marketplaces, eBay and Groupon at the time, like other marketplaces really start to gain some traction. We saw great technology like Shopify and others launched to the market to really help. Listen, you could, in 30 minutes, you could go onto Shopify, you could register your own website and you could start selling product, right? So, I mean, the simplification of e-commerce was really, underway. And then obviously 2020 happens with the pandemic and, things, where there were cracks, they then just became, an inch wide to a mile wide. And the, what was holding all of this together got exposed, and the weaknesses in supply chain were exploited, right? Which again is opportunity for us today, and what we're seeing some really exciting technology and innovation and thought leadership to make sure that doesn't happen again. Let's hope that what happened over the last couple of years is the worst we're going to see in our lifetime and the next generation's lifetime, and there'll be a lot of MBA courses taught on the heroics, that took place during the last couple of years. And when people ask me, like, what are my thoughts on how supply chain and professionals and technology, what did the last couple of years look like? How did we get through it? And I really do believe it comes down to like one word, which is heroic, right? We could definitely play Monday night quarterback and highlight some missteps, but going back to my comment about bands of brothers and bands of sisters, everyone came together and solved what were the most challenging days in supply chain, and I think that's something everyone in this space should be really proud of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's interesting. So you talked about, you mentioned when the pandemic hit, that the cracks started to get exposed, right? Inch, mile, what have you. And you said what was holding it together. As we look back and we try and sort of learn the lessons from from how we deal with that. As you said, like courses are going to be taught on this. But what were some of the things that you saw that kind of were holding the supply chain together historically that was revealed as maybe a weakness, or maybe not necessarily a weakness, but just maybe too rigid, right? Because rigidity causes things to break when under stress sometimes, right? So what were some of those things that you were seeing that were holding it together that we now know maybe have to be more flexible than they were in the past?
Maybe that's a great question. And maybe I would start with culture, right? Culture, if you think of a 3PL or an e-commerce fulfillment company or any brand or retailer doing it themselves, you walked into their warehouse and I don't think previous, with some exceptions, 3PLs and brands and retailers, when you walked into a warehouse, the teammates might not have were almost maybe treated like a commodity, right? And there was a lot of temp labor that would, companies would just churn through, and it was almost like, I just need to replace the next body. I need 30 headcount. I need 50 headcount. And what happened where that crack became exposed was when we had labor shortages, and when labor costs, went up faster than we've ever seen. And so you start to see companies now, which I love and appreciate, really focus on culture, really look at employee retention and those KPIs as they relate. And you see a lot of leadership and management, gold on that too. So that really has become a big thing, and something I'm excited to see. I think from a technology standpoint, some of the older ways of communicating with organizations, like, listen, some companies are still doing CSV files dropped into an FTP folder, and that's how things are getting done. We still have the antiquated EDI tech that'll probably be with us for many years to come. And what everyone is working on now to solve for that is really standardization of tech stacks and technology, and reducing the fragmentation that's in there. Because when you think of it, the tech that enables supply chain, whether it's, coming over from your port and that kind of first mile in the journey, all the way through, ERPs and, transportation management, order management, warehouse management, there's so many layers. And now you're starting to see that those layers are becoming more connected, because that was a big problem, right, over the last few years. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. And again, that simplification of how we, and that standardization that comes with that of technology in the space.
Yeah, that's clearly something that we're a bit familiar with.
Right.
It's interesting. That's a standardization of tech is kind of it's a fascinating subject to kind of dig into, because EDI itself was a good swing at that, right? I mean, EDI was a standard that was brought up so that companies could do business electronically more efficiently. But over the years, like many different standards, kind of it evolved into, we kind of joke about it being sort of a non-standard standard, because everybody kind of
Right.
has their own flavor of it, which means that it's not standard anymore. But at least people are familiar with the concepts, and the documents are named the same thing and so forth. But I don't, I'm not sure that I see people moving to some newer, fresher technologies, clearly. But the reality is that everybody has their own back end, right?
Right.
eBay's back end is never going to match Shopify's, is never going to match Amazon's, right? Everybody's got their own. So flexibility seems to be one of the themes that we hear, and kind of alluded to that earlier. We're talking about rigidity, but flexibility seems to be one of those things that just comes up again and again and again. Flexibility and the ability to adapt and be able to adapt quickly is one of those things that has been sort of a hard lesson learned for a lot of folks.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, you know, COVID happens, e-commerce goes through the roof, right? Nobody can go out, or does go out, or wants to go out. And so, new audiences come to e-commerce. I could, my folks, for example, started doing a little bit of ordering online, and other people that maybe historically had not been online purchasers started doing more and more of it. So I think the community grew quite a bit. It put a lot of pressure then clearly on supply chain. What are some of the things that you saw that companies did that was successful to deal with that versus not successful? Again, kind of the whole theme today is like, how do we deal with sort of the uncertainty that comes from from these types of situations?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what we've seen is a lot of innovation, right? And we've seen a lot of actual investment into that innovation. So, if you look back over the past 24, 36 months, you saw a lot of venture capital and private equity money poured into solving some of these problems, right? Even pre-pandemic, but certainly, post-pandemic and throughout. And I think there's a lot of winners, and unfortunately, there's some that aren't going to win the game. And if you take a look at, everyone is trying to figure out and start with the customer, the end customer. What does the customer want, right? So we've seen the emergence of quick commerce over the past, 24 months, right? Really hyper focused in the last 24 months, where I could place an order. I'm in New York City today. I could go on GoPuff and I could place an order and have a bag of chips delivered to my hotel in 15 minutes. And hundreds of millions of dollars poured into that concept. And now what you're seeing is a lot of those venture capital and private equity firms, knocking on the door saying, it's time to see a return. It's time to start stabilizing those businesses. And the unit economics aren't there, right? So we're starting to see that we're seeing layoffs, we're seeing some mergers, we're seeing some doors closed. I do like the fact that we are, in supply chain, there's a lot of innovation. Some things are going to hit and some things aren't. So is quick commerce, is the United States market ready for that today? It doesn't appear like it's ready, or we're there yet. Could it be the building blocks for what is the right solution 2, 3, 4 years from now? That's what kind of excites me. So you're always going to test and fail. So maybe that was on the grimmer side of the fence. If you look at, on the positive side, you started to see, the maturity of brands and retailers. And maybe I'll start with brands. If you go back, 5 years or so, if a brand was going to outsource their e-commerce fulfillment, it was a really challenging decision on a couple fronts. First of all, for a lot of these entrepreneurs and startups, their inventory is like a child, right? So that they don't want to give up control, and they want it close to them. They want it close to home, right? If they're going to relinquish that control, they want to be at least able to hop in their car and see their child, within a 1 or 2 hour drive. So what has matured over that is, again, kind of going back to the pragmatic thinking, where realizing if I have my inventory placed across the United States, closer to my customer, that's going to give my customer what they want. That's going to check the box for being able to do fast and free delivery and making it convenient for my customer to make purchases. So I think that maturity of the market and the brands and retailers to again be okay relinquishing control and being more okay with others handling that essential part of their business, which is doing the fulfillment of their orders. It has really elevated over the past couple of years.
Yeah, and at the same time, though, it's a tricky balance. We have these
Absolutely.
conversations quite frequently because, clearly, basic logic would say, well, if you get the inventory closer to the consumer, it's going to get there faster, and you're going to open up new opportunities, and people are going to be happier. But the very real reality is that inventory ties up cash or ties up assets, debt, whatever, right? And so CFOs all over the world want to minimize inventory
Right.
because there's these important details like making payroll every 2 weeks or whatever, right? So it's a really important thing to try and figure out how do you get this inventory close enough to the consumer, but not increase your carrying costs so dramatically, right? How do you balance that? How do you know where to put which inventory, which SKUs, all of those different things? That's one of those areas where we're seeing some innovation and where we're playing around, quite frankly, as you know. But um, I think when you reference quick commerce, so quick commerce, are you talking about really kind of regionalized DoorDash type of things? Where right, so you've got regionalized inventory being able to sell regionally and then have like local couriers and so forth deliver.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that is probably easier to pull off from an e-commerce standpoint. It's easier to pull off if you're a small regional player because that's your world. It's harder to pull off when
Right.
you're talking about sort of how do you do that nationally, right? That becomes really, really complex.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I mean, we over the past couple of years, you've seen it play out in mostly like NFL cities, right? So, high dense populations where, GoPuff and others were, and and those are the companies that, are struggling a bit today. There's a couple other examples though where we've seen some good success. And there's a company based out of Chicago called Foxtrot, and it's I would call it a high-end convenience store model. And so they have foot traffic, right? So, they've got retail presence and they've got foot traffic, but then they also leverage that retail location to then do quick commerce. So they're leveraging the same inventory for both retail, brick and mortar, and e-com. So it's kind of like an omni-channel, like a micro version of omni-channel. And they're seeing a lot of success. So again, I think we're gonna get to the point where we know what works and where the unit economics are there. So yeah, I think more exciting examples of Foxtrot and others will emerge over the next couple
Yeah,
of years.
and it's not just some of those startups that are investing in this either. We've been lucky
Right.
enough to be working with Amazon on some of the front end stuff around Amazon's BOPUS or Playad BOPUS, which is known as local selling, but it is the same concept of, obviously it's a global marketplace, but even just in the United States, going onto Amazon and being able to find localized inventory that you can go and pick up, or that same program supports local delivery, and that could be via couriers, it could be via your own fleet of delivery vehicles, or it could be via the standard, the common suspects of DHL and FedEx and USPS and whatever. But even the big players like Amazon recognize that regionalized inventory, being able to leverage regionalized inventory, is a really, really big deal. There's a huge opportunity there, and it's worth investing in.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Listen, 10 years ago, the KPI for fulfilling an order was that you would ship that order after you received it in 1 to 2 days, and then it would be delivered in another 5 to 7 days. And the customer, right? We were okay with that. That was the norm. We're never going to go backwards, right? So Amazon is setting and laying the foundation for what we will all have to comply with at some time. It's just a matter of when.
Mhm.
So Amazon Prime and 2 day, it's never going to become Amazon 3 day or 4 day, right? We're never going to go backwards. We're always going to continue to go forward with getting and putting out as doing what the customer wants, right? Customer expectations are not going to go back. So I think the more Amazon does and the more they test and the more they learn, I mean, there'll be enough pie to go around for all of us as well. And really, to go back to what you said too earlier about inventory placement, I mean, think of all the PhDs and all the engineers and everyone that Amazon has. They still don't get it right all the time, right? So, no one has cracked the nut on perfecting it. It's just a matter of what percent do you have to be right for it to make sense. So, and again, there's so many different factors, but if you're right 85% of the time, and you don't have to ship multiple packages, and you have the right type of SKUs in the right markets, then it makes a lot of sense, right, to spread that inventory out. But there's still a lot of great tech out there, a lot of great tech to come to help people make those decisions.
Yeah. Well, with technology as a whole, it's much easier to take something that is inherently complex and figure out how to simplify it than it is to take something that that starts as very super simple and then try and build the complexity and sophistication that's required to be able to pull it off, right? And what we've seen in this is that in order for somebody like an Amazon, or really any national company that's got inventory in multiple locations, in order to be able to pull off this regionalized inventory, it really comes down to sophisticated systems integrations. And if you don't know and understand where that inventory is, if you don't know and understand what it's going to cost to deliver inventory from each and every location, then that stops you from being able to publish prices correctly so you can protect your margins. It stops you from publishing shipping costs or knowing what your shipping costs are so that at least you could build that into your pricing model. This is a fairly complex problem to solve at its very core. And it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for even the big boys like Amazon to be able to figure it out. So kind of back to sort of dealing with the pandemic and some of these lessons learned, right? What were some of the other things that you saw that you mentioned people started innovating? What were some of the other things that you were seeing that people were doing to kind of work around this?
So I think the adoption of omnichannel and broken into two parts, right? So you had digital native brands that said, I'm only going to sell online forever, right? And then you had retailers that said, I'm a retailer, my model is B2B. So what the pandemic did was it forced B2B retailers, right, to tap their toes in the water of e-commerce. And as we came out of the pandemic, we started to see retailers reach out to digital native brands to say, hey, you had this wild success over the pandemic. I want your product on my shelves. So that transformation on both sides of the fence is where we're starting to see a lot of activity, right? And a lot of expansion. I think people that were singular focused are now, and they were kind of forced to play in the other side of the fence, have seen some success. And we're going to see more of that, over the next several years. But to your point, the only way that will be done is primarily through leveraging the right tech stack. And from a four-wall perspective, a facility that does e-commerce fulfillment is not set up or can scale to do B2B, and vice versa. A pallet in, pallet out facility is not designed to pick eaches and to do individual direct-to-consumer orders. So there's still a lot of change management. There's a lot of work to be done, but the exciting part is, there's a lot of activity going on that front.
So if a brand is, let's just take an example of a brand that has, let's say that they're known, it's a well-known brand, like it has gone through traditional distribution, maybe selling through brick and mortar partners and retailers and so forth, has also made a decision to go direct, right? And so they're now dealing with this, they're dealing with store replenishment, right? Pallet in, pallet out, but they're also dealing with, high volume eaches. how should they look at building a resilient supply chain? Like, what are some of the questions they should be asking themselves, and or the things that they should be looking at?
I mean, I think they have to start with their people, right? So they have to start with, do I have the right talent set on my team? Because Joe Smith, who might be leading the B2B efforts, might be a superstar, but that might not translate to Joe Smith being able to be a superstar on the direct to consumer side. So I think it's a people evaluation that you have to go through. It's an operational evaluation, right? An assessment of, like, how do I scale? How do I take it? Maybe I did a pilot, right? Maybe I'm a B2B brand and I went direct to consumer and I did a couple pilots, or I've done it for a couple of years. I've had some success, but how do I scale that? So I think from an operational industrial engineering standpoint, there's a lot of work to be done. And then, on the tech front, it's different too. And maybe before even getting to the tech, on the B2B side too, when you look at it, if I'm selling a product and I'm selling into Walmart, Target, Walgreens, and major retailers, I was mostly concerned with finding partners close to ports, right? Let's just say I brought everything in from Asia. It's all coming into the port of LA. Most of my buying agreements were probably structured in a way that I didn't really care. I wasn't responsible for the transportation costs to the retailer distribution centers. So I was very focused on having a network around the port. And now as I expand, I have to look for other partners, or expanding my relationship with my current partners dispersed throughout the United States so I could be closer to the consumer. And now I have, one of the things that we work with companies a lot on is, as simple as it sounds, it's getting down to a unit of measure, right? Because if I'm used to shipping a pallet or a case or an inner pack, now I have to maybe change my systems and my SKU methodology to be able to do eaches, or, what's my strategy from a technology standpoint when I want to sell bundles or packs or kits, whether that's on Amazon, right? And all the Amazon prep that has to go on, or into my 3PL partner for direct to consumer. So, I mean, we could spend 3 hours on that alone, but I mean, that scratches, there's a lot that has to be unpacked and thought about before you kind of think about how, scaling isn't a switch. It's a process and a methodology to really look at every aspect of the business to see, what has to be done to ensure that it's successful.
Yeah, and you really have to look at it from the perspective of building a foundation. The unit of measure one is a really interesting one, in that when a brand that has historically dealt with, let's call it traditional distribution of store replenishment and shipping pallets around the country, a lot of these companies, really super large companies, have made major 6-7 figure, hopefully not 8-figure, but sometimes 7 to 8 figure investments into these systems, right? Into ERPs, into WMSs, and so forth. And we have run into some scenarios with some really well-known brands who their systems were not configured to be able to handle eaches. Their each was a case, because they never saw a world way back when they
That's
implemented.
right.
They never saw a world where they would sell anything less than a case. And e-commerce has changed all of that, right? E-commerce is a world of eaches, right? It is.
That's right.
You have to build your foundation on eaches if you're going to do it correctly and be able to scale. And from the foundation of eaches, you can do the beauty of the digital world versus the physical world is you can publish stuff virtually all you want, right? So you don't have to have a prepackaged 6-pack, but if consumers want 6-packs, you create a 6-pack listing, and when that order comes down, that's 6 eaches that you're throwing in a box, and that's your 6-pack. You can merchandise in a lot of really creative ways without tying up inventory. But to be able to do that, it requires setting up your catalog at the base unit of measure of eaches, right? And And it's just, it never ceases to amaze me how many of these legacy systems have been set up in such a way that they really struggle with doing that. And so they need something in between to be able to essentially do the translation.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And to your point, what's happened over the past several years too is a lot of that technology that the ERPs, or if you look within the four walls, the warehouse management system, whether it was a tier 1 or tier 2, is usually a locally hosted platform or system, right? There are so many great solutions today that are web-based, right? It's all becoming, we've really, I think the whole supply chain tech space has done a great job transforming into SaaS-based solutions that, again, that's not to say it's easy, right? Because some of those legacy systems, you can't, you have to do some open heart surgery to find a way to make the connection happen with modern APIs or a SaaS-based solution. But the good news is there's a lot of work on that front, and from your tier 1 to your tier 3 providers, you're seeing what used to take, what used to be a 24-month project, right? I'm gonna do a transformation of my warehouse management system. It's going to take 18 to 24 months. You can now do that in a matter of a few months, right? And that's really exciting, and that's where you're starting to see a lot of acceleration in digital transformation and adoption in supply chain, because the road to get there is becoming more simplified.
Yeah, but yet at the same time, so I do agree with that, and it's been nice to see, because in scenarios where historically maybe we'd have to connect to several disparate systems and to be able to facilitate a network of inventory across different WMSs and 3PLs and whatever, when there is a single cloud-based solution, you're really doing one integration, but then you're just synchronizing with the different locations, right? So when you route an order through one pipe, you're just saying which one you're going to route the order to. So it makes integration easier, but yet at the same time, I do think it's important that brands and these organizations understand that you don't necessarily have to re-platform. Like, the technology does exist that allows you to be able to adapt. Because if you've made major investments into your systems and they're running your B2B business, that's generally going to be the sacred cow, right? You don't want to disrupt that business because it's funding everything else.
That's right.
And even though e-commerce is, definitely a major part of the future, it's also one of those things where you can't afford to tip the apple cart, so to speak, and revise all of your infrastructure just to be able to do e-commerce. So I keep coming back to this concept of flexibility, right? Flexibility and adapting, because if you choose to upgrade and you have the luxury to be able to upgrade your WMS systems and get them all, get all of your locations running on the same WMS, that's fantastic. And I think it'll make your life easier. And if you can do it, you should do it. But yet at the same time, you don't have to wait for that in order to be able to move forward. You can use systems that can sort of bridge the gap for you. The other thing that I would say does come up more and more, you mentioned some consolidation, right? And organizations that are successful in selling across many different channels and have that foundation set also tend to be the ones who are in the best position to absorb those who are not, right? So from an acquisition standpoint, if you're a brand and you're in a particular space and you're sort of kicking butt and taking names, you may have opportunities to go out and buy up some of your competitors. And guess what? Those competitors are going to be running different systems, right? So if you want to onboard competitors quickly and be able to facilitate distribution across a distributed network of inventory, you need that flexibility in place, just from a strategic standpoint, to be able to adapt to whatever your either opportunities are, or in the case of the pandemic, the negative things that you're forced to react to.
Completely agree, Michael. Completely agree.
So just a reminder, anybody who's got any questions, feel free to send those in, and we'll deal with them as they come in. One of the things that we kind of had on the list here to talk a little bit about is We talked about some of the things that are going on and what people should take into consideration as far as strategy goes. But what about sort of, let's call it instrumentation or KPIs? Like how should a company be looking at managing their fulfillment ecosystem? How do they know when they're successful? How do they know when they're efficient versus not efficient? What are some of the things that you're starting to see?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of really important KPIs as it relates to e-commerce fulfillment. And whether you're doing it yourself or you're using an outsourced partner and you want to keep them accountable, it really starts when product arrives at the front door, right? So from what we like to call dock to stock. So how long from the time the trailer pulls up and the pallet comes out, or the container is unloaded, to the time that product is available for sale in whatever sales channel it's being offered in.
Mhm.
And that KPI is typically 24 hours or less. 24, one business day or less is what was really, I would say, standard in the industry right now. The important aspect of that, though, is getting the inventory accuracy correct, right? So if you don't receive it quickly, if you don't receive it accurately, everything else is almost going to be irrelevant because you're going to have so many problems downstream. But inventory accuracy, I mean, that's something that really has to be near perfection. So we're seeing, when you look at an e-commerce fulfillment a contract, you're seeing inventory accuracy as an industry standard of 99.8 or 99.9% of the time, inventory accuracy from an SLA standpoint.
Can I pause you for a second there on that?
Yeah, please.
Just for everybody's benefit. 99.8, 99.9 of what? Like, how do you measure that? How is that measured, and how does an organization stay on top of that?
Yeah, and it's a great question because there's a lot of different ways to do that. But typically what will happen is either on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annually cadence, there will be cycle counts that happened.
Yep.
Fast, a moving SKUs, meaning that the SKUs that move the fastest, they're typically cycle counted on a 30-day cadence, and then slower moving SKUs scale down to slower. So contractually, when you're looking at it, you're going to be monitored on a moving SKUs on a 30-day basis, and others based off of contractually how often those cycle counts are happening.
Okay. And is that measured on, like, when you say percent accuracy, is that measured based on unit count then, just raw unit count across the board, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Is right. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Cool. Okay. So inventory accuracy, dock to stock in less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
What else? What are the other things that they should be keeping an eye
on? Same day fulfillment, right? So no longer do you have 24 to 48 hours to fulfill an order. Same day fulfillment. Usually what we're seeing in the market today is a cutoff of 3 or 4 p.m. in the time zone of the facility. So any order that would drop into your warehouse or warehouses by 3 or 4 p.m. time zone of that facility, they should be pick, pack, shipped. And here's where the hang up typically happens. It doesn't mean that the carrier label is generated and put on the package. It means the package actually went into the truck. So it doesn't mean an order drops at 3 p.m. and it's pick, packed, shipped, and it's staged for pickup the next day, right? It's put on a pallet because maybe third shift handled it at 10 p.m. and so that's a call out then, and that's an issue that's something there should be a lot of communication about internally or externally.
That's a really common thing.
Yeah,
we've been doing this for around 13 years or so, And I can't tell you the number of times we've been asked, hey, we want to batch gen labels at the end of the day.
Right.
Because we need to be able to get the tracking information back to the sales channel so that we meet our SLA. And it's generally something that we highly discourage. If somebody wants to do it at the end of the day, I suppose that's their call. But I can tell you that it just absolutely messes up fulfillment, because now you're having to collate printed labels with boxes, and man, just error rates go through the roof when people start playing games like that. It's just not worth it. You just got to perform. You got to hold people.
You just have to
the
perform.
fire.
And not only that, think about from a consumer perspective, right? I buy something online. They guarantee it's going to ship that day. I get an email confirmation. Hey, your order is shipped. Here's your tracking number. I go to track it, and UPS, FedEx, DHL returns. Oh, that number is not active, right? So now I'm pinging their customer care department, and it's just cascades from there. So get it right. Just get it right.
Right. Yeah. What about other things like order accuracy and delivered on time and things like that?
So order accuracy is another one where there's not a lot of room for error. Contractually, 99.9% accurate is what a partner should be offering, or your internal team should be offering you from a business standpoint. Obviously, shooting for perfection, but 99.9% is really what that SLA should be held to. Return processing is a big one, right? Because, I mean, just think of, I saw an estimate I was reading actually last night. They're estimated to be 400 million returns generated this year, or I'm sorry, it was $400 billion worth of product returned through e-commerce in 2023. That's up from almost 220 million just last year. So the number is massive. What typically happens is everyone is focused on getting inventory and making it available for sale, getting it out the door. And the returns SLAs are usually the ones where brands are a little more forgiving, A, from a contractual standpoint, and B, from holding your partner accountable. So returns is a whole, I mean, I'm sure you could have a whole 3-hour segment on reverse logistics, but contractually, that's where we're seeing a lot of forgiveness, right? So you're usually seeing process my return within 48 hours or 72 hours. So there's usually a multi-day lag that a 3PL is given from a return standpoint. And because that lag is there, it's just not as prioritized, right, as the other. Again, everything going out is generating revenue. Everything coming in, right, is a cost. So, but from a customer experience standpoint, you can't avoid it. You've really got to focus on it.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, cool. We do have a couple of questions I want to get to here. I'll just read it off. Great to have you on, Dan. Would love your thoughts on a very painful, I assume the very painful process of finding the right 3PL. Usually this is made up of lots of Google searching and months of communication, and still things get missed. How can brands do this first the right time? Or
awesome question.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think it's actually one of the solutions that we at Fulfillment IQ help a lot of brands go through. So it's not, it's a multi-step methodology, but I think one of the most important, and I've worked with hundreds of brands on this front. The most successful relationships between a brand and a 3PL is when they're treated as a partner or extension of their business, right? So previously you saw where maybe the partner was treated almost like a commodity, like, I'm going to pick someone based off price, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to go out and find another partner. That doesn't work. And the reason that doesn't work is there's no bigger mistake you can make than not picking the right partner and taking the time to not just look at pricing, look at the tech stack, look at the people, go and tour the facility.
Yeah.
Shake hands with the men and women that are going to be fulfilling your promise on a daily basis. So there's that relationship aspect that is super important. But again, going back to the pragmatic approach, it's understanding what from a brand are you promising to your customers, and how do I find a 3PL that has those capabilities to check those boxes?
Yeah.
And the question that came up is painful for brands, right? Because if you Google e-commerce fulfillment provider, you're going to find some really good brands, right? But you're going to find brands that have a specific solution for a specific type of customer, whether it's a startup, an SMB, the mid-market, enterprise level. And most of what you see when you're Googling are brands that have huge marketing budgets, right? So they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on SEO and ranking at the top, where at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that's the right partner for you. So
yeah, and I'm going to pile onto this just a little bit, just because we have both A, seen, and B, had to be the ones who show up, with the fire truck to try and deal with the fallout of these bad decisions.
Yeah.
But by having to do rapid integrations to a new partner and, all of these types of scenarios. My experience in the 3PL space is that for many, many, many years, and probably even, I would say, still today, 3PLs have been viewed as a commodity. And I would urge anybody watching this to just get rid of that mindset. Like, this is not the place to pinch individual pennies. Yes, dollars matter, when you're talking about, if it's dollars of differences, absolutely that matters. But everything you just mentioned, Dan, matters so much more. And being able to have a long-term partner that you can work with and be able to perform over time will save you so much more money. And there are ways, we're seeing stuff just through optimizing orders through routing and through using some better intelligence to understand where to put inventory. We're seeing that people can save 20+% of their shipping costs. Guess
Right.
what? That more than pays for the slight premium you pay for a good partner.
You're absolutely right.
You can make up these dollars someplace else. Don't choose a 3PL based upon it being the cheapest price, because this is absolutely an industry where you get what you pay for. And anybody with a warehouse, could be a dirt floor warehouse, can hang up a sign and say that they're a 3PL and put out a nice website. And so I absolutely agree. Make the trip. It's worth the flight. It's worth the time. Go visit your 3PL partner, shake their hand, look in their eyes, share a dinner. You'll learn a lot in that time as to whether this is somebody you feel like you can trust or not.
And a big red flag if they don't invite you to come meet them, right?
Yeah.
If you can't walk into, like, Amazon's not going to let you walk into their facility, right?
Yeah.
But your 3PL partner, if they are not opening up the door, inviting you in, I would caution that relationship.
Yeah. And look for the small things when you go on site. Is the warehouse clean? Do they have garbage in the aisles? Like, all of that stuff is an indicator of how strong their operations are.
That's right. Is the staff making eye contact with you? There's all those little nuances that are super important.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question on this of, how, if you flip that script just a little bit, and let's say that a 3PL is watching this, how can 3PLs make sure that they're finding the right customers?
Yeah. I mean, another great question. I think a 3PL has to kind of look in the mirror and be very descriptive about who their ICP is, right? What type of product, what type of volume, all of those different characteristics of a brand to know who they should be targeting. I'll do a shameless plug for us. We just launched a product called 3PL IQ, 3PLIQ.com, that actually matches brands and retailers together based off an algorithm that understands what are the capabilities of the 3PL, and what are the solutions that the brand needs, and as well as where the orders, where the customers as well. And we did this because this was so painful in the market, right? And we said, we want to try and solve this, and we want to push a product out to the market to handle this. And we're not monetizing this whatsoever, right? So we are basically pushing it out. It's free for brands, free for 3PLs, as a way to try to do something that's helpful in the market. But really understanding, one of my good friends and partner at Fulfillment IQ, we used to kind of argue about this. The only thing I think we've ever argued about is you have to be willing to understand, what am I not good at, right? Look at what you're good at and go after that market, and be willing to say no, because there's nothing more painful for a 3PL than onboarding a client that you cannot meet their needs. It's going to cost you, it's going to go into the waste stream and the red part of your P&L in a nanosecond.
Yeah, that's honestly, I don't know that statement is specific just to 3PLs. That's actually
right.
that's a pretty solid business axiom right there.
Yeah.
So kind of wrapping up, there's another question here. We've got just like 3 or 4 minutes left. And this last question, saved it for last because it does kind of tie into just a good wrap up. So what are the things that that you've learned that, if you were to say, hey, you know what, here's the most valuable advice I can give to an organization going into e-commerce. Like, look at these 3 things or consider these 5. What are the things that, if you were to kind of put this whole conversation into a bow, what would you advise?
That is an awesome question. Maybe I'm just trying to think of the high level, because it does become a little bespoke with each individual customer, but be willing to share data, right? So one of the things we see a lot is not willing to share data and being overstating your volume and sales channels, right? So what we see a lot of brands doing is being very aggressive with forecasting, trying to leverage those numbers to secure better rates in the market.
Yeah.
And that just causes, just be true, be honest, be upfront, be transparent, and because if you start on the wrong foot, it's going to go sideways really, really fast.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about good partnerships, right? Good partners don't BS each other.
Yeah. I mean, just be pragmatic, be data driven, be realistic, and listen, your 3PL partner, you've got to be able to break bread with them. You've got to be able to look them in the eye, treat it the same way you would treat your attorney, relationship with your attorney, with your doctor. I mean, this is an extension of your business, and I just can't highlight that enough.
Yep. Great. So we have one more question that snuck in here right at the end. I'm going to have to ask you to give the Cliff Notes version of it, of the answer. Can you speak to automation relative to AI and robotics as it pertains to operations and labor efficiencies?
Wow, Cliff Note version. That's not fair,
Yeah.
Michael. Let me just give you a quick example. First, the caution is don't over-engineer your facility, right? Let volume grow. I would rather see a company solve for volume than solve for planned volume. And we see a lot of that because things change, right?
Yeah.
Size of product, size of bundles, things change, and you don't want to over-engineer it to where it stunts your growth. But what I will give an example of, we worked with a 3PL where in a manual environment, they were picking orders with a unit pick rate of 35 per hour, man hour. And they were I keep using the word pragmatic, but they were very data driven to do the engineering to know, once I got to this threshold, this line in the sand, I will launch a robotic solution, and I know that 35 will increase to 100, and I'll have an ROI on my investment under 10 months. So mapping that out, I mean, that's just one success story. After the first week robotics went live in that facility, they were doing 135 picks per hour based off the 35 manual they were doing, but they wanted the volume there to make sure that the AI, the robotics, the automation was perfectly engineered for the exact situation, and solution they needed.
Yeah, that was what I was going to wrap it up with as well, is that robotics, there are a lot of different types of robotics that perform different functions. If you're shipping big and bulky versus 8 or 9 line item orders versus a single item per order as an average, like those are just dramatically different scenarios to solve for. And there are different robotic solutions for those. I love what you said there about solve for the volume that you have versus what you plan. But also know that if you make heavy investments into robotics, you're getting more and more specific to the types of clients that you want and should take on. Because if you take on the wrong clients that are not designed for that specific use of the robotics, you're kind of screwed. So, and those things are not cheap. So I wish we could keep talking, but we are at the top of the hour. I want to honor everybody's time. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you've got any follow-up questions that you'd like to send over to Dan, I think it's just D Coll at Fulfillment IQ. Is that correct?
Dan at fulfillmentiq.com.
Dan, sorry, fulfillmentiq.com. All right. So feel free to send him any questions, or feel free to reach out to us here at eTail Solutions. Again, thanks for your time. Next month, again, we're going to have Dana Smith from Lasco join us, and we'll be talking about data silos and system silos and how to break past that to drive growth and profit. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Michael.
Yep. Take care.